In this show, I was thinking about this idea of how we model space and time, and how we model it with objects, how we locate ourselves in a larger narrative of time and space. In the Mayfair space, I really focused on this idea of modeling. So each sculpture is a model of an idea or a phrase that is impossible to model, that is poetic, that is ephemeral, that's often based in a time, in a narrative, so that it's something that you actually cannot pluck out. For example, model for a catharsis, model for a final thought, model for a task forgotten. Something that we recognize, but it's really impossible to model with materials and physical space. The way that I've installed this space is kind of like a landscape when you come in. So the works group, as a whole, work together, but then when you go into each one as an individual unit, you have a kind of complete world. Also, in a lot of my work, there's these larger gestures, and then within them you find these detail moments. And here you start with a detail moment that can, when you come up to it, actually feel like a much larger gesture. In Mayfair, there's a series that's actually broken between the two spaces and connects the spaces. And it's a series of prints that in some ways acts like a world clock. And the idea is that it's a newspaper from different locations around the world and photographs of midnight on those days. And the newspaper is the first of the year. So the photograph is as midnight circles the world. So this idea of using the front page of a newspaper to create a calendar is extended in the second floor at Wharf Road. And in that space, I used 3 months of first pages. And each day, I would take the newspaper, collect it, and I started cutting out the photographs from the newspaper and taking them out completely. And I wanted to juxtapose this idea of a current event, reading of current event, and what something is something current, what makes it newsworthy in the moment, with images that in some ways implied vast time and space, that were completely dislocated in time and space. So you'd read something that was past, that's passing, that seemed very urgent in the moment, with something that had no sense of time or space, and that juxtaposition for each day. So as you walk through, you see different images of landscapes that have this quality of being anywhere and any time. Part of my instinct in taking out all of these images was the daily onslaught of information, that when you turn on your computer or you pick up your newspaper, that we have so much photographic information thrown at us, and to actually erase that out, and the challenge of trying to find a photograph that in some way would relate emptiness and lack of the suspension of a specific time, of a specific moment. The fact that the newspapers are on the floor was this idea of an object that becomes throwaway, that the newspaper in its second life becomes something that you wrap your fish with, that you put down to paint the walls, that you use at the base of your kitty litter, that it becomes this very ephemeral object. And to put them on the floor as if they become coverings for a floor, protection for the floor, to actually do another activity. So they have this second life as a kind of throwaway object. And on each newspaper, there is a kind of activity. And I was thinking of them as actually a floor pane for almost like a portable studio, that you could put it down and that studio would be portable. And that leads me to the downstairs space. And the downstairs space is really, I was really thinking about this idea of blurring the boundaries between a work of art and a site of work. So in the ground floor, you really have a site that's really a desk. It's like a portrait of a desk. And I was thinking of things like Picasso's still life with tables, that it's actually like a painting of a location that's a still life. So if it's a portrait of a desk, then it actually becomes a portrait of a person, but the person is absent. And the reason that I was interested in that, doing it on that space, was because when you walk into a gallery space, there's always that awkward situation where you don't know where the boundary is between the people who are working there, the work that's going on there, and the exhibition space. So to make that confused in that space, you have a view of the desks that are actually places where people work, while you're watching the view of the desk that's in the exhibition space. And there are objects from their desks that are pulled from their desk into the sculpture. So you'll see that replicated. You see name cards of the gallery in the desk. You see plants from the sculpture pulled into the workspace. Each of the spaces has a very particular personality and character to it. And I think in this space, more than any space, really deal with the idea of making a landscape. This idea of bringing the landscape into an interior, and then the interior, the interior being thrown out into a landscape, is there's a little moment in the room where the piece actually goes to the exterior, and you have the fake rock inside and the real that spill out into space. And the second idea I was really thinking about is this idea of breakdown of materials. You see in the desk downstairs that it has this sense that it's actually on its last leg, that it's in a dilapidated state. And on the top floor, I really wanted to focus on this idea of the rock, which is something that I had started in Venice, but to really have a room that just showed you the breakdown of a rock and how I was thinking about the formal properties of a rock being taken out of a rock, and then how we would actually relate to that object. If you took out things like gravity from a rock, and what it is to replicate a material. So what I did was photograph rocks, so take these collection of photographs and then wrap them around an armature. And when you see them, you recognize that they're not rocks. You see that they're photographs, but you can't help ascribing weight to them. And that kind of teetering space of something being real and fake in front of your eyes was something I was interested in playing with. In making the photographs, one of the things we had to do, as you do with any photograph, is to adjust color. And this idea that color, when you're making anything with color, is this constant adjustment, and that you can play with it, is something that we become more and more attuned to with digital imagery, even though it existed in film as well. And so the wall actually has color separations of different spectrums of how you play with color when you do a print or when you perceive color in real space as well. So you have a full spectrum of the prints of a rock along the wall. I'm playing with this idea also that even when you take a photograph, you often have a color bar at the end to measure color, that you're to use as a measurement. So in some ways it becomes a huge measuring role for the way we perceive color through the whole space.